For today's video, I wanted to talk about the notion of the toxic fandoms or just toxic individuals on social media in general, and how are these things such as toxic fandoms are born in the grand scheme of things. And I'm probably not going to use a lot of imagery in this video. I'm just going to put a bit of gameplay, hopefully, of the game Control, which I highly recommend you try out if you can, because it is absolutely amazing. Okay, so let's get right into it. What I would just like to introduce you to my kind of origin story, if you will, and how I came in contact with these toxic fandoms and the negativity and the vitriol that is kind of found online in every section of the internet nowadays. I'm a big, huge Star Wars and DC fan. I'm a hardcore Star Wars fan, to be perfectly honest. With DC, I'm kind of more like a Batman guy, but I'm a fan of it all the way through. And I grew up with the prequels and especially with the Nolan Batman movies. And when it came to that, I wasn't really into online discussions or buying into any of the negativity. And there were, of course, a lot of negativity with the Star Wars prequels just in general. And when it comes to me, I'm just rather a positive person. Although where I come from and actually where I live in my country, people are always absolutely negative about every single minute detail that they can find about their lives. And I feel like that they are so small-minded and limited individuals that it's kind of a plague on the mind. And this is kind of what happens on social medias as well. When Disney bought Star Wars, I was kind of happy because we would get more Star Wars stuff. And when The Force Awakens came out alongside Star Wars Battlefront, for me, I was like, yeah, Star Wars 1 is on. I was so excited to get more Star Wars. And there was just positivity coming from basically every side of the fan base, or every side of the media, and fans really liked the movie and the new stuff. So everybody was kind of on board. But after the Nolan Batman movies, of course, The Dark Knight Rises came out in 2012, I wasn't really into superhero movies all that much. I felt like that I had my kind of superhero coming of age story with those three movies, and I wasn't really into Marvel stuff. I really wasn't even aware that they were doing these movies. And one of my friends actually asked us, a bunch of guys, to see Batman v Superman in theaters. And I didn't even watch one single trailer for the movie. I didn't really care for the movie in and of itself. I didn't really have a positive or a negative opinion after seeing the movie in theaters. But after that, I was kind of sucked into this void of negativity by the internet after that. And I started just crapping all over the movie and I could be influenced by these bloggers and just people who I followed on social media that, yeah, this movie is really terrible. And if you say the same things as other people say, you kind of feel part of a tribe. And I felt like that I got this vibe as well. But for some reason, it probably because Batman is in the movie, I gave the Ultimate Edition a shot. And that was the time when I came in contact with social media. As when I looked online for BVS, I was introduced to this overwhelming and senseless criticism and nitpicking and just negativity surrounding the movie and its characters, and I didn't really understand it because I'm someone who always looks at these things from an objective lens. I try to be as objective as possible. And that was the point where I was like, there's so much negativity. I have to find out what the reason of this negativity is. And does that make any sense whatsoever? And with that movie, it was always to me I've heard so much negative talks that this doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, that character wouldn't do that. And while I was watching the movie, BVS Ultimate Edition, I always asked myself these questions does this make any sense? Maybe they don't explain this part well enough here, and I always end up at the part where I always ask myself these questions, but the movie, a few seconds after that, they just, give you an answer to that, or just show you the answer to that question and present to you that very thing in a very organic and thoughtful way. And I was always surprised by that people don't really think when watching these movies. As I was introduced to this negativity, it was really hard just being a DC fan and just being a fan of those movies around the time of 2016 or 2017, as I always felt like that there was absolutely no discussion at all about these movies, just the vitriol of hate and negativity. And I felt like that the fans of these movies weren't being listened to either by social media or just people in general who shared a difference of opinion. And I felt like also the media didn't help this part, as the media was also piling on Zack Snyder's films and Zack Snyder in general, even though basically everything that they have said about the guy and his films are wrong from an objective perspective. And when it came to Star Wars, The Last Jedi came out and a lot of fans didn't like the movie, and I felt like the main reason because the previous movie set up certain things and mysteries, and it had certain expectations which you would logically want to come to fruition in the next installment, but that didn't really happen. And of course, I can't really talk about The Last Jedi without talking about the media, and I feel like the media's responsibility when it comes to just fandoms in general. And when we have to talk about the media, what I have to tell you here is that I feel like positivity no longer sells. You have to pique the attention with rather clickbait headlines. Like, for example, sexist Star Wars fans hate women, or, stuff like that. Misogynistic people in that certain fan base. Because otherwise, if you don't use adjectives such as that, nobody will click on your article. Nobody cares about Star Wars nerds bickering about the lore or something. And I felt like that with the media, the conversation was never really created through it. There was never really anything meaningful coming from it, which I feel like is the whole point of art itself, to have a conversation about the movie or a painting that you saw. But with the media, it was just always a one-way street. Good is rather a conversation, not a unilateral decision. And when it comes to just positivity no longer selling, I feel like acknowledging the facts or just doing extensive research on topics is no longer required, as that doesn't really sell either. You just have to create something that is so sensationalized and over the top that people would just click on it because they want to know what's in there. And of course, 99% of the time, that never lives up to expectations. This is why we shouldn't hype things to oblivion, for starters. And maybe one of the bigger things with the media is that the media takes things out of context to push a certain narrative. And what I mean by that is you can check out the kind of case study of Kelly Marie Tran being quote-unquote bullied off social media by Star Wars fans, and how it was completely blown out of proportion and was factually incorrect because she left social media like 2 months before The Last Jedi came out, which she was in that movie. But of course the media picked it up as Star Wars fans bullied her social media because that sells. And of course, where is the responsibility in that? The same goes for the Star Wars prequels. Star Wars fans weren't necessarily piling onto that stuff. The critics and the media was piling onto Ahmed Best, who of course played Jar Jar Binks. Like, the critics and the media pile on the prequel movies and crapped all over them, but they didn't take any responsibility for, Ahmed Best trying to commit suicide or just thinking about doing it. Of course, the Star Wars fans have to be blamed for that, because you would have to look in the mirror to see that it was your doing, not necessarily another person, or that you were leading the pack towards that. And I feel like that taking responsibility is one of the most important things that we have to consider. And this goes for the individual as well, not necessarily just for the media. And through that provocation, and I've mentioned before, the sensationalization, there is a perpetual cycle of abuse and hateful comments and just this abhorrent behavior coming from the fans that reinforces their perspective, meaning the media is created, and this perpetual cycle just creates clicks and revenues for these sites. So therefore, of course, they're going to continue putting out articles which don't tell the truth, because this creates clicks and revenue for them. And the funny thing to note here is that several YouTube channels created their careers, or were created, of this vitriol and negativity around especially The Last Jedi and Star Wars in general. Because again, it sells, instead of course, acknowledging the facts, they push their own narrative as well. And this goes back to just taking responsibility and to the individual level as well. But when it comes to the individual, what is really important to note here is that stories, mythology, and characters are important to the individual and to the collective as well. But I feel like that a lot of people take it too far, and these things cannot be a major part of somebody's life, like friends or family in that regard, because these are just stories. These are fictional things. They are not real in the sense. I understand, being a huge fan of Joseph Campbell's work, how important these stories are. But I feel like a lot of people take it too far. But I also understand the fact that being a fan of something like an intellectual property like Star Wars or DC is a part of someone's identity, and therefore the integrity of that story and the characters is important to them. And I feel like that the individual itself is smart. And I feel like that they can figure out that you don't necessarily have to fall for clickbait articles and for individuals or people who just want to create controversy with their uneducated takes. And instead of responding to these uneducated and controversial takes, instead of responding to them with hate and ignorance, we can respond to them with love, knowledge, understanding, and just factual evidence in order to correct these uneducated takes, if you will. And I feel like another thing that has piled onto this has been the tough times that we find ourselves in greatly nowadays. And I feel like that everybody is just so stressed out, and we are way more likely to get triggered by even the smallest of things. And I feel like that what we have to do is just realize that everybody needs somebody to just sit down, talk to, and just listen to them. And this is what a lot of toxic people on social media don't necessarily have, sadly. They are just crying out for help with their takes. They are crying out for attention, and I feel like that people are giving them the wrong kind of attention. Not the kind, attentive, listening kind of attention, but the hateful and just negative kind of. And of course, when it comes to social media, I also have to mention that social media is also a huge aspect of it. As when it comes to that, your mind doesn't really recognize that there is another person, another individual, another human being on the other side of the conversation that you're having, and therefore it facilitates the fact that it's easier to be rude to someone when you don't realize that there is another human being sitting on the other side of the keyboard. And I feel like that it takes a humongous amount of effort, especially nowadays, not to be consumed by the negativity on social media, not to be part of the vicious cycle that I've mentioned before. And to just give you one really interesting example, which I don't feel like a lot of people have picked up on, is that in BVS, there is a specific reason why the media is basically treated as the third main character of the film. I don't think that a lot of people have picked up on this, but it's a really interesting thing to ponder about. And I feel like that we can all play our part in the equation of being part of a toxic fandom, but the good thing is that you, the individual, don't have to be a part of this, because you have a choice in the matter every single day. And I'm not advocating for anything other than, instead of engaging a comment or a person with rage, hate, and negativity, I'm advocating for you to take a step back, take a few deep breaths, collect your thoughts, and just be kind to one another, and to just listen to them. Everyone is hurt on some level, and sadly we are not taught how to properly deal with that, because we are kind of taught to suppress these emotions. But the more we suppress them, the stronger they become. And therefore a lot of individuals vent that anger and frustration out on others. But I feel like that we can do better. We will. We have to. The choice is in your hands. But that's all I had for today. Thank you for taking the time and watching this video. Leave a like if you have enjoyed it. I would love to hear all of your thoughts regarding this specific topic in the comments down below. And subscribe for more content like this one. And I will see you in the next one. And until then, remember to keep it insightful.